When you hear these two words, human trafficking, you think of this problem happening somewhere else, but this is actually happening in our own backyards.
And it's unacceptable, and we need to bring them home. And this is Chick to Chick.
So those two words we just talked about, human trafficking, there's so many myths and misconceptions about this. People don't realize this is happening in our own backyards. We tend to think, what? Human trafficking? This doesn't happen here. It is happening here. It's affecting so many people. This is a big business. It is a $10 billion business in the U.S., $150 billion worldwide. So you might be wondering, what is human trafficking? Really, it's a form of modern day slavery.
Absolutely. So we have a lot of questions today. We want to know, who are they targeting? You know, are there specific age groups? We want to know where the problem is, the hot spots. And so thankfully today, we have two people who are going to bring this insight to our conversation today. Joining us, we have Steve Turner, and he is an anti-trafficking advocate, and also Rhonda Hendrickson, and she is with the YWCA of Greater Harrisburg. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's just start right at the beginning here. What is human trafficking? Rhonda, you want to take that question?
Yeah, human trafficking, as you said, modern day slavery. It's about the commercial exploitation of one person for the profit of another. And that may be sexual exploitation or labor services. So it really does amount to modern day slavery.
You know, as a mom, one of my biggest fears was my children being taken, whether I'm at a store or at an amusement park, take our eye off the ball for 1 second. So I want to know, who are they targeting? I mean, is it a specific age group, specific gender? Can you help us out with that?
So, first of all, the United States is really a leading destination for individuals to buy children for sexual exploitation. But traffickers are targeting individuals who won't be missed from their lives typically. And when I say that, traffickers will target just about anybody that is available, is vulnerable, but specifically they're really looking for people who won't be missed from their lives. And I'll flip that over to Steve for a little more detail. Steve, do you want to fill that in?
Yeah, I mean, this is so among the many things. There's over 40 million people worldwide that are being trafficked, as Rhonda said, for both sex and labor, and at times both. Number one. Number two, there's millions in the United States of America as well. And it's not just children, it's not just girls. One of the things is the kind of the snatch and grab. While that can occur, what we see, what Rhonda and I see at the YWCA of Greater Harrisburg in our shelter is so many women with children, but also men of different ages and boys of different ages, that they're coming out of huge amounts of trauma. Trauma is what creates the vulnerabilities that set someone up to be trafficked. And so there is, sadly, there's no immunity if you're of a certain age or a certain gender or a certain background. Anyone can be trafficked. And we have seen trafficking from little kids all the way up through women in their 50s and 60s. So this is a broad spectrum pandemic of its own right.
So we know this is a problem here in Pennsylvania. How big of a problem is it in Pennsylvania? And are there specific hotspots where it's happening more?
Yeah, definitely. This is a problem in our region, and it's a problem everywhere, including in our rural areas where you may not think these things are happening. But what I can tell you is that our project, which is called Path 15 Crossroads, is centered up and down the Route 15 corridor in the state of Pennsylvania. We have served over 400 victims and their family members since we started this project back in 2014. Most of the survivors that we're working with have been identified in the Greater Harrisburg area. So really, you're talking the Dauphin County, Cumberland County, York County areas, and about 88% of those cases are from those areas. And most, not all, but probably somewhere around 85% of our cases have to do with sex trafficking.
It is just makes my blood boil. Like I'm sitting here as a mother and it makes me angry, and I cannot even imagine these poor, vulnerable people, children, I just can't. So what are some of the tactics, as you were talking about, basically anyone who is really in a vulnerable, already in a traumatized, probably I'm thinking like runaways
or broken
homes. What are the tactics that they use to lure people?
I think the two keys here are trauma, a history of trauma, and trauma leading to vulnerability. One of the things that we see, again, like Rhonda said, we see so many folks that come into our shelter. For example, we have a combined domestic violence and human trafficking shelter for women and women with accompanying children. Male victims we house off-site at another secure location, but all the services we provide are free and confidential, no matter who you are. Number one. Number two, the overwhelming majority of our trafficking survivors, our trafficking victims, they grew up in a home with domestic violence, and they were also sexually assaulted in and around the home, often by the time they were between 11 and 14. Does that mean that everyone that survives domestic violence is going to be trafficked? Of course, the answer is no. You survive rape or sexual assault. Does that mean you're going to be trafficked? The answer is no. But you start to pile up trauma indicators. You start to pile up, and especially the emotional abuse that flows through homes where there is violence and broken homes. But also, like you guys said, runaways, kids in the foster care system. Vulnerabilities lead someone to being vulnerable. And then what happens? Any human being that is in pain, nobody wants to be in pain. And oftentimes what we as people do, if we are in pain, we medicate away our pain. Once there is a connection to an addictive substance, some sort of a drug, coke, crack, meth, molly, heroin, fentanyl, any of the combinations, there's too many to list, and you run out of the drug supply, well, then what do? You start trading your body or selling your body for drugs, and that horror show then becomes manifest.
So that's what they're luring them with, then. Drugs, the promise of drugs. That's the golden nugget, so to speak, to get them into this way of life in human trafficking?
Or have they groomed them? I mean, are these people who kind of hang in these vulnerable communities and spaces and just groom them as a person they can trust?
Yeah, all of the above. I mean, the drugs especially are both recruitment tactics to lure somebody who may already have substance abuse issues and the vulnerabilities that Steve talked about, but they're also control tactics to keep the victim in place, to keep them compliant. And certainly, if they didn't have a substance abuse problem when they were lured and forced into this kind of life, they will, like Steve said, sort of self-medicate. It takes away the pain. It numbs the abuse that they're suffering, and they will depend on that. So the traffickers are building dependencies, and that goes for the drug addictions. It goes for individuals with mental health. We've seen numerous cases where individuals have mental health issues, and they're going to prey on those things and make that victim vulnerable and dependent on them for their very livelihood at that point.
So
we also see another. I'm sorry to interrupt. No. I apologize, Flora, but I mean, and Rhonda's response leads directly into this too. There's another hook. There's another avenue, and that is the emotionally adrift. And this seems to work more so with teenage girls, but also boys, but teenage girls that fake romance, that fake relationship, that seduction where somebody is paying attention to them, and they're an outsider, or they've gone through a bad breakup, or again, emotional violence in the home, and somebody is recruiting them or paying attention to them, either on social media or at the mall food court, or in the cafeteria at the school, or the bus stop, any sort of place, and that peer-to-peer recruitment, or adults masquerading on social media as a peer. I mean, but again, it's vulnerabilities and preying upon vulnerabilities, and that parasitism. That's the horror show that sets people up.
Going after week.
It is
the
awful. Rhonda, what is the YWCA's role in all of this?
So we designed the Path 15 Crossroads project to really, get on the forefront in the state of Pennsylvania to address human trafficking and provide intervention for victims. So all up and down that Route 15 corridor, 13 counties participate. There are a total of 7 rape crisis and domestic violence human trafficking service providers now, as well as legal service providers. We provide those comprehensive healing services for victims. We also provide training for professionals to identify victims, as well as awareness presentations for community members to understand, what trafficking looks like. Unfortunately, many people think it looks like the movie Taken, the snatch and grab. And while those things happen, and we've seen them, it isn't what it typically looks like. It's more about preying on these vulnerabilities and really looking for people who, if they're gone for a little bit or if their life changes, nobody misses that and nobody's going to be suspicious of it.
So quickly now, as we wrap this up, Steve, what is the goal? What are you guys trying to do? We mentioned at the top of our podcast, it's time to bring them home. Is that what the goal is here?
Well, I mean, ideally, yes, of course. But I got to tell you, I mean, once you are in the claws of pimps or gangs or familial traffickers, I mean, all we can do is have an open door, and a door that has no judgment to it is open 24/7, 365. And we are always ready, willing, and able to bring folks in. But let me also say, you're also going to hear in the next episode the next installment from the Pennsylvania Turnpike and we have a wonderful partnership. So not only are we north-south from the New York border to the Maryland border, but because of our partnership with the Turnpike and their excellent work on doing publicity about the National Trafficking Hotline, we also connect then Ohio to Jersey. But all of that, interestingly, that sits right here in central PA. That is the crossroads, the intersectionality. And so the goal is education. The goal is creating safe spaces, like Rhonda said, where no matter what, it can be 3 a.m. Thanksgiving morning, our doors are open. Our advocates are there. Our shelter is ready, and we will bring people into safety anytime we can.
And that is the perfect way to end this podcast. Absolutely. Thank you both for being here. And he really set us up for the next podcast.
Completely.
We don't normally do this, but we're going to continue this conversation because now that we've talked about the problem, now that we've talked about this is happening, we are going to be highlighting in our next podcast what the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission is doing to raise awareness and something really, really important. Do you know what the sign for help is if someone is a victim of human trafficking?
That's right. So we hope that you will tune in the next time. Our podcast will be Signs for Help.